after the physical trade fair has ended. The Africa Automotive Show will present a platform for auto manufacturers, assemblers, original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and component suppliers to exhibit their products and also interact with potential buyers and suppliers. It consists of an auto forum, auto show, and B2B and B2G exchanges. The AU Youth Startup Program will have a dedicated pavilion for youth startups in Africa where they will showcase their innovative ideas, prototypes, goods, and services. The IATF will provide opportunities for matchmaking with venture capitalists, entrepreneurship training, networking among the youth and other delegates at the trade fair. IATF 2023 will provide a unique and valuable platform for businesses to access an integrated African market of over 1.3 billion people with a GDP of over 3.5 trillion US dollars created under the African Continental Free Trade Area. The African Export-Import Bank, African Union Commission, AFCFTA Secretariat, and our premium partners invite you to join us at IATF 2023 Intra-African Trade Fair, connecting African markets. For more information, visit www.intraafricantradefair.com.
responsible for making everything happen. It lights up our cities, creates jobs, powers schools, and transports our people. It drives factories and industry and empowers innovation. It keeps us connected and enables science and exploration. With it, we give and receive better healthcare, and our standard of living in every aspect of life improves. Energy really is the cornerstone of the African economy. But what will we do if this precious resource runs out? How can we protect and develop this lifeblood of our beautiful continent? The African Energy Chamber will host African Energy Week at the Victoria and Alfred Waterfront in Cape Town. The interactive exhibition and networking event will run from 18 to 21 October. The 4-day conference will unite Africa's energy stakeholders, drive industry growth and development, and promote Africa as the destination for energy investments. Recognizing that energy transition is shaping global conversation, the week promotes the continent's position and the future of its energy sector. African Energy Week 2022 will be critical for the continent and its people.
Africa's premier trade and investment event, IATF 2023, is expected to attract over 1,600 exhibitors from more than 75 exhibiting countries and over 35,000 attendees, and is expected to generate up to $43 billion in trade and investment deals. IATF 2023 will once again consist of a trade exhibition where countries, large corporates, as well as small and medium enterprises, SMEs, can set up pavilions and exhibition stands which will enable them to customize their exhibition to fit their unique requirements. This offers private and public entities opportunities to showcase their goods and services. Trade and Investment Forum, the 4-day conference, will feature leading African and international speakers and a variety of sessions dealing with African trade and investment issues. Specifically, the conference will feature dedicated sessions on trade and investment opportunities under the AFCFTA and will also include training workshops covering exporting, standards and marketing. Creative Africa Nexus, CANEX, will showcase Africa's creative economy in fashion, music, film, art and craft and sport. The CANEX program will include a Creative Africa Summit and dedicated creative industry exhibition, a B2B and B2G platform. The platform will provide opportunities for matchmaking, business exchanges, and conclusion of business and investment deals. This is supported by a dedicated African Buyers Program. Country Days has sponsorship opportunities and is open to 4 countries. It presents a platform for the 4 selected countries to showcase their trade, investment, tourism, and cultural opportunities. IATF Virtual. This platform showcases goods, services, and investment opportunities on an interactive online platform. The IATF Virtual is currently live and will continue even after the physical trade fair has ended. The Africa Automotive Show will present a platform for auto manufacturers, assemblers, original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and component suppliers to exhibit their products and also interact with potential buyers and suppliers. It consists of an auto forum, auto show, and B2B and B2G exchanges. The AU Youth Startup Program will have a dedicated pavilion for youth startups in Africa where they will showcase their innovative ideas, prototypes, goods, and services. The IATF will provide opportunities for matchmaking with venture capitalists, entrepreneurship training, networking among the youth and other delegates at the trade fair. IATF 2023 will provide a unique and valuable platform for businesses to access an integrated African market of over 1.3 billion people with a GDP of over $3.5 trillion created under the African Continental Free Trade Area. The African Export-Import Bank, African Union Commission, AFCFTA Secretariat, and our premium partners invite you to join us at IATF 2023 Intra-African Trade Fair, connecting African markets. For more information, visit www.intraafricantradefair.com.
Energy is responsible for making everything happen. It lights up our cities, creates jobs, powers schools, and transports our people. It drives factories and industry and empowers innovation. It keeps us connected and enables science and exploration. With it, we give and receive better healthcare, and our standard of living in every aspect of life improves. Energy really is the cornerstone of the African economy. But what will we do if this precious resource runs out? How can we protect and develop this lifeblood of our beautiful continent? The African Energy Chamber will host African Energy Week at the Victoria and Alfred Waterfront in Cape Town. The interactive exhibition and networking event will run from 18 to 21 October. The 4-day conference will unite Africa's energy stakeholders, drive industry growth and development, and promote Africa as the destination for energy investments. Recognizing that energy transition is shaping global conversation, the week promotes the continent's position and the future of its energy sector. African Energy Week 2022 will be critical for the continent and its people.
Africa's premier trade and investment event, IATF 2023, is expected to attract over 1,600 exhibitors from more than 75 exhibiting countries and over 35,000 attendees, and is expected to generate up to $43 billion in trade and investment deals. IATF 2023 will once again consist of a trade exhibition where countries, large corporates, as well as small and medium enterprises, SMEs, can set up pavilions and exhibition stands which will enable them to customize their exhibition to fit their unique requirements. This offers private and public entities opportunities to showcase their goods and services. Trade and Investment Forum, the 4-day conference, will feature leading African and international speakers and a variety of sessions dealing with African trade and investment issues. Specifically, the conference will feature dedicated sessions on trade and investment opportunities under the AFCFTA and will also include training workshops covering exporting, standards and marketing. Creative Africa Nexus, CANEX, will showcase Africa's creative economy in fashion, music, film, art and craft and sport. The CANEX program will include a Creative Africa Summit and dedicated creative industry exhibition, a B2B and B2G platform. The platform will provide opportunities for matchmaking, business exchanges, and conclusion of business and investment deals. This is supported by a dedicated African Buyers Program. Country Days has sponsorship opportunities and is open to 4 countries. It presents a platform for the 4 selected countries to showcase their trade, investment, tourism, and cultural opportunities. IATF Virtual. This platform showcases goods, services, and investment opportunities on an interactive online platform. The IATF Virtual is currently live and will continue even after the physical trade fair has ended. The Africa Automotive Show will present a platform for auto manufacturers, assemblers, original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and component suppliers to exhibit their products and also interact with potential buyers and suppliers. It consists of an auto forum, auto show, and B2B and B2G exchanges. The AU Youth Startup Program will have a dedicated pavilion for youth startups in Africa where they will showcase their innovative ideas, prototypes, goods, and services. The IATF will provide opportunities for matchmaking with venture capitalists, entrepreneurship training, networking among the youth and other delegates at the trade fair. IATF 2023 will provide a unique and valuable platform for businesses to access an integrated African market of over 1.3 billion people with a GDP of over $3.5 trillion created under the African Continental Free Trade Area. The African Export-Import Bank, African Union Commission, AFCFTA Secretariat, and our premium partners invite you to join us at IATF 2023 Intra-African Trade Fair, connecting African markets. For more information, visit www.intraafricantradefair.com.
Hello. One. 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 Oh, hello. One. One.
Opat. Opat.
Thank you. I'm just going to visualize the slides. Just use it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please wait a minute.
Is it on?
Please, it's on.
Ladies and gentlemen, please could you make your way to the plenary hall? We are about to kick off with our programming this morning, and we have a very, very important session with a moderator that has flown all the way out from the Bahamas. Her name is Miss Altoviso Munnings. She's from the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, and she will be moderating this next panel. So if you are in the foyer outside the main hall, please make your way into the plenary hall as we are about to kick off our programming for the morning. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start our morning session with our opening plenary. As I said, we have a broadcast representative from the Bahamas who will be moderating this first session, and we are going to kick off shortly. If you are in the foyer, please will you kindly make your way into the plenary hall. We are about to kick off our programming for the day. Thank you very much.
runway. Yeah. Well, good morning to everybody. Could you lower that music, please? Otherwise, I'm going to start singing to it, and you don't want to hear that this early in the morning. Okay, good morning, everyone. I know there isn't a full house at the moment, but apparently the traffic is a little bit tricky this morning, so people will be trickling in. So do grab your seats. My name's Mark Edo. You probably know that by now because I've been the moderator for the last 2 days or so. And what a day yesterday. What a day with the likes of Mia Motley, the heads of state from various places. Yes, it does deserve a round of applause. Thank you very much, sir. Because, you know, you can really talk the talk about building bridges to the diaspora, or you can walk the walk. And I think there was a lot of walking yesterday, and I think there was a lot of synergy, and there were a lot of relationships built, and ideas were born as well. So a wonderful day yesterday, and today is no exception. Now, normally I do a lot of these events, as many of you will know, and the third day is usually like the third day, right? It's like when it's sort of the leftover day. But today is quite the opposite. I was looking through the program to look at some of the panels and the panelists that we were having, and I advise you to look on the app and check this out. And it's incredible. There's some incredible people on the panels today, and the next panel we're going to have is no exception. It's pure quality in terms of the thinkers, the big thinkers that we have throughout the day. It culminates right at the end with a session called Sport as a New Creative Industry, and that's got none other than Didier Drogba. Didier Drogba and Asamoah Gyan, Ghana's great footballer, two great icons of African sport to round up the day. So let's begin now. We're going to begin with a panel session called United We Stand, Deploying Afro-Caribbean Resources for Sustainable Development, Perspectives from Monetary Authorities. But before we do that, I actually have a message for those monetary policy people. It says that at 10:30 there's a forum for ministers of finance and central bank governors. Now, if you are a minister of finance or a central bank governor, or you work for one of them, you need to listen up to this, because at 10:30 we would like to invite all ministers of finance as well as central bank governors and their delegations to participate in the side event titled Forum for Ministers of Finance and Central Bank Governors, taking place in Committee Room 1, which is located on the left side of the main hall. The session, the left side of the main hall, I guess they're talking about when you come out and go left. The session will be discussing reserves management in this changing global architecture. Dr. Donald Kaberuka will make the keynote address. Panelists include Afreximbank's EVP, Egypt's Minister of Finance, and Zambia's Central Bank Governor. So, Ministers of Finance, Central Bank Governors, please go to that side event at 10:30. Okay, let's get the show on the road then. It gives me great pleasure to welcome my dear big brother and mentor to give the keynote address that will set the scene for this panel. Please give a very warm round of applause to His Excellency Ambassador Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining at the African Union Commission.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremony. I greet each and every one of you. We've got honorable ministers here. We've got honorable central bank governors and the other dignitaries. I'm standing before you to make the presentation on behalf of the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. She is unable to be with us this morning. She has to hold the fort on behalf of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, who is attending to other continental duties across Africa.
Can I just, yeah.
But we always operate as a team, and hence my coming before you here to make the briefing. I begin by saying that the resources of the African and the Caribbean regions are very vast, and they are equally very varied. But broadly, they can be grouped into three categories: human capital, natural resources capital, and environmental capital. When we talk of generating the sustainable development of Africa and the Caribbean regions by deploying these resources, a key feature is that both of our regions are among the most vulnerable to climate change and the least contributors of the emissions of greenhouse emissions, causing this environmental and potentially existential threat. The vulnerability is evidenced in tropical storms, floods, droughts, desertification, prolonged heat waves, rising sea levels, acidification of seas, crop failures, rising environmental damages and costs, and, among others, food insecurity and the resultant dislocation of environmental and socio-economic systems. Many parts of Africa do not, for the first time, faced tropical storms and floods in the immediate past rain season. For close to 3 years now, some parts of Africa have also been facing persistent drought situations, leading to the loss of lives and livestock, as well as crop failures. Sustainable central banking is in this connection becoming very important. Convening this session reflects your commitment to sustainable central banking. I salute you for this spirit of environmental stewardship. You are convening against the background of a positive development announced yesterday. During his address in the opening ceremony yesterday, the President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the African Export-Import Bank, Professor Benedict Orama, announced the extension of the operations of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System to the Caribbean region. This development is good for the trade and investment relations between Africa and the Caribbean countries. Trade and investment flows between our two regions are bound to increase and generate prosperity for our people as a result of this development. With this development, the task before you as monetary authorities is to ensure that PAPs spreads to all countries of Africa and the Caribbean. The all-inclusive coverage of PAPs will enable you in making it more efficient, in addition to enhancing its security. In this respect, I urge earnestly all the monetary authorities in the Caribbean and Africa who have not joined perhaps to do so as soon as possible. There are, however, also challenges that confront you as you convene this meeting. I'm going to mention a few. Financial and monetary conditions in many countries around the world, including those of our two regions, are tightening. This is in response to the threats of inflation and recessions, which in turn threaten price and financial stability in the economies affected. Further, many countries in Africa are also facing external debt distress situations. For those countries already seeking external debt restructuring, they are also finding out that the G20 Common Framework on debt treatments is now slowing in delivering the required debt relief, a development that brings in trend additional threats of financial instability, as well as strong possibilities of social and political tensions in the countries that are affected. As we face these challenges, we will stand a few days before the start of the Paris Summit on a new financing pact, which will be held on the 22nd and 23rd of this month. The forthcoming Paris Summit gives us an opportunity to advocate for increased financial resources for poverty reduction and the green transition, among other elements of inclusive growth and sustainable development in our regions and the rest of the world. We can also use the forthcoming Paris Summit to continue our advocacy for reform of the global financial architecture. The Barbados Bridgetown Initiative, closely associated with the Honorable Mia Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, becomes very important in this connection. As part of the reform of the architecture of global financial institutions, we also need continued advocacy for reform of the multilateral development banks. Strategically, we would like them to provide increased concessional and long-term financing in order to, among others, minimize threats of periodic debt crises and the consequent underdevelopment that our countries have been facing in their slow and difficult journey of inclusive growth and sustainable development. Reformed multilateral development banks should also be positioned to address future pandemics better than they did during the COVID-19 pandemic, whose health, social, and economic consequences are still being felt in many countries and societies. We can also use the Paris Summit to advocate for increased deployment of financial resources to the Loss and Damage Fund, a key outcome of the 27th Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP27, held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, in November last year. As Lydia mentioned, our regions, which are least contributors to climate change, are facing rising environmental damages and costs, as well as vulnerability. We urgently need increased financial resources for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, additional to those required to overcoming poverty and underdevelopment. The polluter pays principle, adopted at the June 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, is the bedrock of the Loss and Damage Fund. In this respect, the climate change-inducing commercial activities should also be taxed to contribute to the fund, notwithstanding the fact that our world has market radicals who resist paying taxes. Just as much as we welcome the pledges made by governments and philanthropies, we must also continue to insist that the commercial companies making profits from the activities associated with emissions of fossil fuels must contribute fully, fairly, and timely to mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. Let us continue putting these companies in the spotlight. We also need greater voice in the governance of the global financial system. The Global South is an important systemic part of the global economy, and in this respect, requires greater voice in managing the interdependence of economies. Granted, there is emerging fragmentation of international trade and deglobalization. But this is the time multilateralism becomes even more important. Acting together and in alignment, we can overcome the challenges facing us. Acting in isolation, we can sink one by one. We need each other to survive and thrive as humanity. I'll conclude my brief statement by stating that the issue of carbon trading is increasingly becoming important as the world moves towards the net zero transition. The key question is, when is carbon trading going to be mainstreamed in the country's international trade statistics around the world? Mainstreaming carbon trading in international trade statistics would enhance our advocacy for incorporation of disasters induced by climate change, as well as future pandemics in future debt contracts and treatments. A future must come where net contributors to loss and damage to the physical environment assume the debts of affected countries and communities who are the least contributors. Our two regions are in the category of the least contributors. It is with these words that I look forward to monetary authorities in this conference room giving us their perspectives on how the African and Caribbean countries can work in a unit to leverage their human and capital and natural resources as well as environmental resources to achieve inclusive growth and sustainable development in our two regions. I'll end here and thank each and every one of you for your kind attention. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Another round of applause for Ambassador Albert Muchanga of the African Union Commission there, kicking us off. Some really interesting points, Your Excellency, particularly about mainstreaming carbon markets. Really interesting. I'm going to bug you later for more, for more information about that. For now, we go on to our first panel. The first panel is entitled United We Stand, Deploying Afro-Caribbean Resources for Sustainable Development, Perspectives from Monetary Authorities. The moderator for this session has come all the way from the Bahamas. She's the Deputy News Director for Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. Please welcome Ms. Altovice Munnings. No, hold on to it.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Akwaba. Thank you to Africa Export-Import Bank for this wonderful opportunity. This morning we are going to discuss financing between Africa and the Caribbean, and I want to introduce my distinguished panel. I want to first of all welcome His Excellency Mohammed Ahmad Might, Minister of Finance of Egypt and Chairman of the Afreximbank General Meeting. Next is the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, His Excellency Dr. John Manguda. Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison. Good morning, sir. And my Caribbean counterpart, the Governor for the Central Bank of Barbados, His Excellency Dr. Kevin Greenridge.
Good morning.
Thank you, gentlemen, for participating in this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, the huge financing gaps confronting the regions, most notably in the areas of trade, infrastructure, and economic development, have undermined the process of structural transformation and shared prosperity for decades. In addition, here in Africa and my home in the Caribbean are among the most vulnerable to climate change, and also some of the regions have major challenges attaining all of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by the 2030 target. Substantial investments and structural transformation across many sectors and areas are required. So the objective of this session this morning is to reflect on policies and challenges to optimize the allocation of Afro-Caribbean resources for effective integration and shared prosperity here in Africa and across in the Caribbean. And gentlemen, these are questions that I'm sure all of you can answer real well, since all of you are financial experts. And His Excellency Maid, I want to start with you. How can the necessary funds be mobilized for climate-proofing projects?
Thank you very much for such a question, and let me say that for climate change financing, it will be very important to see different types of financing rather than traditional and the conventional ones, particularly that we started with green bonds. We started to see that we need to get cheaper green financing. Let me say, a country like Egypt, we did not see this experience. We went for green financing by issuing green bond for the first time in the Middle East and North Africa, but eventually it was more expensive than the traditional Eurobond because of the additional cost we have to pay for many requirements attached with issuing green bonds. There are some innovative ideas now for climate change financing, which we encourage. And also, I believe that it is very important for international financial banking system or financial institutions is to set up an architecture for financing climate change, yes, which is different from the traditional ones. We tried even with the commercial banks to get green financing, green loans, and Egypt has an experience of getting $1.5 billion for a green loan in order to move with that. But let me say that we need to see in different international financial markets some innovative idea to go for it. I remember that I went to the Japanese financial markets and I issued samurai bonds, cheaper, and really it was good experience. So now they are saying to us, we can go further and see green samurai. It's an innovative idea, cheap, but we have to raise the issue of guarantees. The issue of guarantees for accessing some of the international financial markets will be an issue. So for example, we are trying in Egypt now to go for a Chinese financial market to issue Banda bonds. But because of the need of guarantees, we asked the African Development Bank, and they have approved it some couple of weeks ago, a guarantee of $745 million to issue Banda bond in the Chinese capital market. And now we are in the final stage with get another guarantee from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So I think this will help us, Egypt, to issue different types of instruments which can help us financing climate change. This is on one side. The other side, MDBs, multilateral development banks, they need to offer not only encourage private sector, but they need to offer more cheap financing and more lowering the terms and the conditions. I think that one of the issues which I think we need to talk about with them is that they must use their AAA rating in order to get hundreds of billions of dollars and make it offer it to countries who want to finance climate change at a cheap price. Because now, if you are telling me I have to go for renewables, I need a lot of money to go for renewables and to go for projects which can address the climate change concern. But where is the money for me to use it? And if there is even accessibility, it will be highly cost. So we need some innovative ideas again. I see some of the commercial banks now started to design some innovative ideas, but let me say that with guarantees must be increasing from the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, and others in order to offer good financing at a cheap cost to push us in this direction and or to help us to go in this direction. One of the issues which we have discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh last year in November is that how can we put a mechanism, international standard mechanism, in order to be used in financing climate change and also to ensure that green bonds, for example, will be offered at a cheaper cost, not at higher than traditional cost. We issued what is called debt sustainability coalition in order to see how can we move in such direction.
Thank you.
But again, I believe that we have to do more in getting cheap financing for climate change.
Excellent point, sir. Very good. I also have another question for our Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Governor, Dr. Manguda. Dr. Manguda, do overseas territories have unfair risk perceptions of Africa and the Caribbean? If so, if you feel so, how should it be addressed?
Thank you very much, and once again, congratulations to the African Export Bank for the 30 years of doing a good job.
Thank you.
From my perspective, very simple, is that we need developmental mandatory authorities, which means Ministry of Finances and central banks, that are supposed to adapt to the changed circumstances. What we see in both in the Caribbean and Africa is the changed circumstances. We have got the change in climate changes, as we have said. We've got a global financial squeeze throughout the world, and for the geopolitical circumstances. All this needs us to remain united, working together in harmony to ensure that we minimize the risks of falling as a team. In fact, it says united we stand and divided we fall. And therefore, we don't want to fall both the Caribbean side and the African side. So we need central banks, we need monetary authorities that are developmental in nature, that looks at the payment systems across the continents, as we discussed earlier yesterday, and we need those to mobilize resources to ensure that we bring in the two continents or the two sister countries. If I look at Africa as a country and the Caribbean as one. So what you are saying is very critical. We need to work together in harmony. We need the central banks to ensure also that they understand each other as a society. So we need a cross-fertilization of ideas from the Caribbean and into also to Africa. Reserve management becomes a very important attribute to this, whereby there is the resources in the Caribbean and the resources in Africa are put together in one basket to develop Africa. That's why we are pleased by what Afreximbank has done in trying to bridge the gap between the two societies, so at the end of the day we put our resources in one basket and also be able to deploy the same resources to improve the welfare and sustainability of the Caribbean and African societies. It's a must to do it. We can do it, and we need to continue doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go on, we want to welcome two new panelists on our stage. Dr. Armstrong Takang, he's the Chief Executive Officer for the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, and Mr. Assoumani Abdou Salam, Special Advisor to the President, former Minister of Finance for the Union of Comoros. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Thank you.
Dr. Mangura, you mentioned some very good points there. I wanted to know if the Central Bank Governor for Barbados, Dr. Greenridge, do you have anything to add to what Dr. Mangura said?
Good morning, thanks.
Good morning.
Not to add, but to perhaps elaborate a few points. And under the theme, which is deploying Africa, Caribbean resources. First in the Caribbean, and I think it came out, we have quite a lot of resources among the African space countries. And we've, through Afreximbank, have found creative ways to start to deploy those resources to bring the Caribbean countries into the fore. Many ways, but let me focus on a few. So, what are the main problems for climate financing? Right now, as being said, too short term, very expensive, and it crowds out other things because of these debt ratios that you get imposed. So what we need, longer term, much cheaper, and a way to bring in crowding, I suppose crowding out. With partnership, for example, with Afreximbank, with the office in Barbados now, for the Caribbean region, pledging $1.5 billion. That's providing wholesale funding and guarantees, credit guarantees to the local banks working through the Central Bank Barbados and the regional central banks. And what that does is unlock the potential liquidity in the system because, as we heard yesterday, banks here in the Caribbean, etc., have become a bit risk-averse to some degree, focusing a lot on AMLs as opposed to... So that allows them to take on and finance climate and greening projects, etc. Two, you've heard yesterday that from the Prime Minister of Bahamas that there have been an agreement for the Caribbean countries to use the PAC system model. We're moving to the second stage now for pilot countries, and I know my Prime Minister Montley is pushing on that. And what that does now is allow us to settle in local currency, but more importantly, it stimulates trade, of course, because now you don't need US dollars to take. But from a central bank perspective, and it's from a small country in the Caribbean where we import most of what we consume,
Yes.
one of our constraints to growth is foreign exchange.
Right.
We have, what, Barbados, at least $3 billion in terms of liquidity in the system excess. But that means nothing if we don't have the convertibility. But now we can trade in that, and that gives us space on the foreign exchange side to do other things and deploy those resources differently. On the issue of climate finance, again, what we are doing, we know the CARICOM Development Fund has now been a partner shareholder in Afreximbank. That provide that backing from such a huge institution as Afreximbank allow now for the Caribbean Development Fund to move ahead in certain directions. One direction to move ahead in is developing a regional resilience bond. And that now, cleverly put together, will provide longer-term financing, because right now for us in Caribbean, our main source, the only other game in town you hear Prime Minister Montley say is the IMF Resilient Self-Sufficient Trust, and that's very limited. And now this provides another avenue where they can complement with the backing of Afreximbank and provide financing, longer-term maturities in the area of that. One point I also want to make in terms of creative financing, what we can do. What Barbados have done now is to include natural disaster clauses and pandemic clauses into our bond issuance. And what that does is that in the event of a natural disaster, and it's defined in certain parameters, so it's very clear. how you will trigger it if you want to, or have pandemic similar to what we had before. In the case of Barbados, because we've written those into our new debt instruments, immediately it frees up for us 19% of GDP in terms of financing space. Now, there's no one coming if a hurricane hit Barbados now, and unfortunately one is in the air,
Yes.
there's no one, and I pray that it doesn't come, no one is going to come immediately and give you 19% of GDP to start your cleanup. These instruments, initially when we designed them, we thought about them, we were told by international institutions they will increase the price of our bonds. They have not done that. They actually, I believe, the market is giving us a better price than you expect, because what it does, these pandemic clauses, it means that in the event of a disaster, it's known in it, you will postpone payments for 2 years, and you put that on the end of the instrument, and you pay it. So the investor knows with certainty what's going to happen. Doesn't have to worry. He or her doesn't have to worry. If we can get, for example, Afreximbank and other countries to include those in their instruments, then when a disaster happens, Afreximbank and other investors know we are going to pause. The country have the resources while you create other space, and we can start build back. So one call for me will be for that to be taken forward. I know my Prime Minister is pushing it. In Paris is going to be pushing that as part of the, along with the Bridgestone initiative, to help provide the finance in that direction.
Dr. Greenridge, you mentioned central bank perspective. I want to go to a central bank perspective to you and as well as Dr. Addison. And Dr. Addison, you can answer this question. First, to what extent can central banks encourage behavioral change among market actors in favorable of sustainable development?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank you to the Afreximbank for organizing this forum for exchange of ideas. I think that the African region and the Caribbean share very long historical and cultural ties. But it's important also to recognize that investment flows from both the Caribbean and Africa will be critical to growth in both parts of the regions. But let's go back to the issue of cooperation and trade. And we know that trade is largely influenced by the size of our economies. Trade is also inversely proportional to the geographic distance between the two trading blocks. So the biggest problem that we have with African-Caribbean trade is about the distance, major infrastructural bottlenecks. And this is where I was and to write about African Caribbean airline, which would really lead to the kind of integration that we are looking at. So we need to encourage the investments in air and maritime transportation. That infrastructural bottleneck would continue to be a major obstacle to promoting trade between our two regions. Having said that, I think that there are other areas of mutual cooperation where we can derive some benefits. I met with Governor Kenneth of Barbados on Friday. He came in with his team to the Bank of Ghana to exchange ideas for the past 2 days or so. We shared with them the progress that we had made, right? Progress that we had made in our payment systems, getting technology to drive the Ghanaian payment system, mobile money space, and some of the things that we have done to introduce or pilot the central currency, which is the CD. We also did quite a bit from our counterparts led by the governor on the fact that they had also done a debt exchange. And we had a very robust discussion on, how the debt exchange had impacted Barbados and what we could do as a country also to sort of move away from this impact of the domestic debt exchange on markets in Ghana. He was very firm that we will make progress. They have been through it, and we picked up quite useful ideas, in that discussion on the way forward, including what he just mentioned about putting in clauses on pandemic issues in the issuance of our bonds going forward. Then the discussion got to the issue you raised on the multilateral financial institutions, in particular how to take advantage of the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which I think Barbados was the first country to get access to. They got some money from the IMF and the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. I think they also got some money from the World Bank,
Right.
$100 million on that, and sort of encouraging us to, sort of take that path as well, because there are a lot of projects that can be financed using those green resources. So yes, the facilities are there. International financial institutions to help finance some of these climate issues. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Addison. His Excellency Katang, what is the solution in your view to the lack of access to finance necessary for small and medium enterprises to grow?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me extend the apology of Mr. Wale Dun, the Special Advisor to the President on Monetary Policies, who had to go on another assignment. He asked me to stand in for him. First of all, I think the key thing for us in Nigeria is really recognizing the fact that when we work together as a region rather than individual states, we're much stronger and we can mobilize a lot of resources amongst ourselves. Nigeria has always held this belief, and that has been manifested in the types of programs we have engaged in, particularly in terms of supporting other countries within the region. And I think we're quite delighted that there is an opportunity of the ABCD, because what that does is that it creates a wider platform for be able to mobilize a lot more people and a lot more resources to address some of these critical challenges that some of them may be even existential, as we've heard over the last couple of days. But one thing we also believe is that as we look to mobilizing capital and resources from other regions, we also need to look inwards in terms of what are the resources we already have that we're not really leveraging on effectively or optimizing. So one of the reforms that the current administration has done is to look at how do we ensure that our existing investments are delivering sustainable returns, because it is through those returns, through cash flows, that we can have a lot more resources for some of these developmental programs. And then also looking at some of the structural challenges that we have in our system. For instance, the idea of petroleum subsidy in our own country, because each country is unique in its own way, to see that there are better ways for us to use those resources. And that's why one of the major pronouncements that the current president made was to take out the subsidies, because what that does is that it's also a mechanism for us to be able to mobilize additional resources to address some of these environmental challenges, as well as providing resources for small and medium-sized enterprises. The company that I run, which is Mofi, We own about 50 companies, valued at about $40 billion. And those companies are across different sectors, intervening in small and medium-sized enterprises, in financial services, in agriculture, mining, oil and gas. And so we see that because the demand for supporting those enterprises is increasing every day. So we have to begin to look internally and see how do we mobilize resources internally to address those needs and support the institutions that have the mandate to support those small and medium-sized enterprises. But the other thing that I want to say is really the fact that as we do that, we also need strong institutions like Afreximbank, because they've been a very strong pillar of support for our financial institutions, and we're counting on them to extend more of that, particularly when it comes to preparing projects that are bankable. Because one of the challenges that we see in our sector is that you could go out there and ask people to come and invest, but they have to invest on bankable projects. And we do not only need the capital, but we also need the services and the expertise to be able to prepare those types of projects, because that is what will attract capital from not only domestically, but externally. So we would like to once more extend our support to Afreximbank. I think Nigeria has always been a pillar of support for Afreximbank, even in their very dark days. Mm-hmm. And I would say that to the president that the administration will be there to continue to support the institution, because we think that a stronger Afreximbank means a stronger Nigeria, it means a stronger Africa, and I also believe it will be a stronger ABCD, and I hope that we'll be able to follow through that and make the ABCD a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Abudu Salam, the question for you this morning is, are investments impeded by insufficient correspondent banking relationships?
Merci beaucoup. Mon propos, je vais l'axer d'abord sur 3 points essentiellement, avec des préalables. Je pense que le thème qui est posé ici est louable de par l'action de l'Afreximbank, de vouloir regrouper ou canaliser les ressources afro-caribéennes pour le financement du développement industriel de l'Afrique. Mais je pense que tout d'abord, il faudrait arriver à mobiliser la grande partie ou la grande majorité de ressources locales, que ce soit au niveau des pays, que ce soit au niveau des régions, avant de parler d'une intégration de ces ressources interrégionales. Je prendrai l'exemple du cas des Comores, où quand vous avez par exemple des ressources de la diaspora qui sont transférées annuellement, qui représentent 25% du PIB, il serait judicieux de pouvoir canaliser ces ressources-là dans des actions d'investissement productif, plutôt que de les laisser telles qu'elles sont aujourd'hui, aller dans des secteurs sociaux, culturels ou carrément de dépenses ostentatoires coutumières. Donc, à mon avis, ce serait la première action, renforcer l'action de mobilisation de ressources locales avant d'espérer accéder à des ressources étrangères, extérieures, pour pouvoir glorifier cette action de ressources intra-régionales. Parce que dans la plupart de nos pays aussi, il y a des préalables qu'il faudrait arriver à résoudre avant de collecter ces ressources-là et de vouloir les injecter dans des actions de développement, sinon ça risquerait d'être des financements à fonds perdus. Il y a le problème de la stabilité, de l'instabilité chronique pratiquement qui gangrène l'Afrique aujourd'hui, pas besoin de donner des exemples. Il y a le problème de la carence des infrastructures de base qui impulse l'initiative économique privée, parce que, comme nous le savons tous, c'est l'action privée qui est le moteur du développement, mais ce n'est pas des actions au niveau gouvernemental. Le gouvernement pose peut-être l'environnement juridique, de favoriser l'environnement des affaires, mais l'action véritablement de développement, ça relève du secteur privé. Donc, Le privé a besoin de ces préalables, d'avoir ces infrastructures en amont de base, avoir cette stabilité politique, administrative, institutionnelle réglée au niveau des pays, et également le gros du problème, peut-être qui doit être en premier, comment arriver à mettre à disposition des financements à long terme pour pouvoir véritablement financer des investissements réels pour nos pays. Des capitaux d'investissement à long terme, moins chers également, parce que nous le voyons aujourd'hui, le coût des capitaux reste quand même assez élevé et ça ne favorise pas les actions de développement. Certes, on parle de diverses actions aujourd'hui, les financements fonds verts, financement carbone, financement, mais sans ces préalables que je viens d'énoncer, ce seraient des actions malheureusement à fond perdu. Donc voilà un peu mon propos, je ne veux pas être trop long, voilà mon propos qui vise à poser les jalons, si l'on peut dire, du financement effectif de l'investissement réel du continent africain.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci. In less than a minute, gentlemen, I wanted to ask if you can answer in less than a minute this question about poverty and lack of employment, because poverty and lack of employment plagues a lot of economies around the world, even in the Caribbean where I live. So gentlemen, in less than a minute, can each of you answer the question, to what extent can structural transformation address poverty and lack of employment opportunities? His Excellency.
Okay, let me use it in this way. I believe you can reduce poverty and create unemployment together at the same time. We have this experience in Egypt after what is called the Arab Spring. We found that millions of the Egyptians working abroad coming back, looking for jobs inside the country. At this time, we cannot create immediately 3-4 million jobs. But what we thought, okay, let us create projects which can create millions of jobs. And this direction helped us to create up to 5 million new jobs for these comers to the country, and also to reduce poverty. Because the most effective way to reduce poverty is to create jobs to people. Whatsoever social benefit package you are offering to people, cash transfer, food subsidy, energy subsidy, whatsoever, it will not be effective. The most effective is to use resources to ensure that these resources will create jobs. And I believe this is one of the very important points, is that whether we can borrow to create jobs, improve infrastructure, improve utilities, services to the people, at the same time, this will reduce poverty. This will be an efficient and less costly, or no, I have to not to expand financing, but I have to limit what I can do, which might not sort out the two important, creating jobs and reducing poverty.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Mangura?
Thank you very much. Poverty is the result of a lack of sustainable development. To develop our economies, we increase employment, and we increase also the welfare of our people. Poverty is the result of misuse of resources. If we use the resources in a manner that is acceptable, best practice of utilization of resources, we increase and also employment. We need to beneficiate in Africa. We have a plenty of resources that I do believe that if we harness them, increase beneficiation, then we also get out of poverty. poverty, it is a disease that can, end of the day, present what I call political challenges in economies. And those can be resolved by formalizing the informal sector. I see in Africa we have a blend of informal sector. We now need, as mandate authorities, including ministries, including government, to formalize such informal sector. You'd find that in most African countries, about 50 and above percent is informal sector. That is not good enough because it does not bring the safety nets into the economy. You want to create middle class that is able to increase the consumption in the economy, and we need to ensure that we need appropriate financial tools to do so. I'm happy about the initiatives like Arise, which is definitely to expand the industrial parks and economies, to bring investments, to reduce poverty and increase employment. So what it means that we need to work together, better together, stronger together, and we need the likes of Afreximbank to be the catalyst. I was reminded this morning, moderator, that if you look at the work that has been done by Afreximbank, it's more like the biblical talents that were given to those three people, the 5, 2, and 1. The one that was given 1, he said the master is very bad, so he put it under the pillow. The other 2, they put the resources to good use by expanding 6 billion worth of capital to give all these countries the resources. You've been able to be a trusted servant, Dr. Ram and your team, for the purposes of developing Africa. That's what we want, to reduce poverty in Africa, to reduce poverty in the Caribbean, to reduce poverty continentally. No one else can do it other than ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Governor, do you agree with Dr. Manguda that financial tools are needed, particularly here in Ghana, to reduce poverty and unemployment?
I agree entirely with everything that he has said. Remember that poverty and unemployment is a reflection of weak growth in our respective regions. Now, our central banks, our key contribution to all of this is to create that environment that helps to sustain growth through the financial sector policies that we implement. If you look at the impact of global shocks, the impact on African countries is similar to the impact on the Caribbean countries as well. So we all need to put into place policies that enhances our buffers so that we are able to withstand a lot of these shocks that emanate from the global environment. It includes improving resource mobilization locally. It includes putting into place policies that would enhance savings to finance development and growth in our regions. And it also includes policies that will help develop our local domestic financial markets. All of these are indirectly very critical to bringing the issues of poverty and unemployment under control.
Thank you. Governor, in the Caribbean, as you know, poverty and unemployment for some reason dominates some of the societies in different Caribbean countries. Tell us about Barbados and how do you feel the central bank can play a major role in reducing these social ills?
As we said before, the governor, the Bank of Ghana just said, our role is provide or create an environment, a financial environment that is conducive to allow for this sort of structural transformation that is needed. I will add that structural transformation takes time, and that is what will give you sustained reduction in poverty. But it's not sexy investment, so to speak. It requires long-term funding, and funding that gives you the grace period you don't have to repair immediately. And on the theme of deploying our resources, for us in the Caribbean, from my perspective, the presence of Afreximbank is a game changer. I won't go through the things I've mentioned by providing the kind of backing for the wholesale funding for the banking sector to allow them to take on more risks and finance projects, or community payment system, those are obvious, and sign an MOU with our Caribbean Development Bank. So that provides the financing to do the structural transformation because you need time. Well, private sector investments want a quick, investors want a quick return. The other thing, again, deploying our resources, as my friend, the governor of the Bank of Ghana said, we came 2 days earlier to learn from one another because we have our collective knowledge is a great resource. Sometimes, even in our discussion, we can learn how to approach the external creditors, how to train them, the behaviors, so we understand the pandemic clauses. We understand how to teach them what we want and move collectively. So, and we are going forward where we're going to have exchange of staff, short-term, to we learn from each other. So outside of the financial backing and resources that Afreximbank is bringing to the table in the Caribbean, that is changing the platform, we can learn Caribbean return home, so to speak, from each other by just exchanging ideas and building platforms that we can see what is working, what is not working, and not reinventing the wheel.
Thank you, Governor. Dr. Salam? Yes.
Merci beaucoup. Tout d'abord, je voudrais situer cette problématique de la pauvreté, qui est une véritable gangrène au niveau de la société, et que si on n'en prend pas garde, ça risque d'emporter tout, je ne dirais pas tout le pays, mais en tout cas tout un pan de la société. Pour avoir eu une carrière de 20 ans dans l'administration technique et politique, je me suis reversé après dans le privé pendant 16 ans, où j'ai eu la chance de diriger un secteur de microfinance, un réseau de microfinance, qui, quelques 12 ans après, est devenu la première institution financière du pays. Ça m'a permis de voir et de dire que si on ne prend pas en charge cette frange de la population qu'on dit les pauvres, en leur créant des outils ou des produits financiers adaptés, tant pour l'épargne que pour le crédit, ça n'améliorera jamais leur situation. Or, justement, dans le réseau que j'ai eu à diriger, nous avions eu la chance d'avoir créé des outils spécifiques, des produits spécifiques d'épargne et de crédit. Et au fil des années, nous avons pu constater que ces gens qu'on a classés initialement pauvres ont réussi à surmonter quelque peu cette pauvreté, et certains même sont devenus beaucoup plus demandeurs que nous étions obligés d'orienter vers les secteurs financiers bancaires. Parce que le réseau de microfinance, comme vous le savez tous, a un certain niveau où il ne peut pas accéder. Donc, nous avons évolué de cette manière, et je peux dire qu'au bout de 12 ans d'expérience, tout le monde a constaté que ce réseau de microfinance est devenu la première institution financière devant des banques commerciales du pays. Tout d'abord parce que je vais dire quelque chose qui risque de choquer certains dans la salle. Nous oublions souvent de dire que le pauvre, entre guillemets, parce que je ne sais pas ce que ça veut dire exactement, eh bien le pauvre, quand il vient emprunter, il rembourse beaucoup mieux que le cadre supérieur ou que l'entrepreneur moyen. Eh oui, madame. Parce que lui, il n'a pas les moyens, et là c'est une deuxième gangrène, de nos sociétés que nous devons régler, il n'a pas les moyens de corrompre le magistrat ou le policier qui est lancé à ses trousses quand il ne paye pas convenablement. Donc, pour préserver sa modeste personnalité, il se fait l'effort de rembourser convenablement son crédit qu'il a demandé auprès de l'institution financière. Alors qu'on le voit tous les jours, ceux qui ont pignon sur rue, qui ont beaucoup de moyens, ils s'évertuent à créer l'insolvabilité s'ils ne créent pas les outils de corrompre l'outil judiciaire. Donc, la pauvreté, c'est une gangrène, il faut la résoudre, mais pour la résoudre, il faut créer des outils adaptés, des produits adaptés qui puissent les amener à émerger de cette situation précaire. Et encore une fois, l'expérience que j'ai eue pendant 16 ans m'a permis, ou me réconforte encore davantage dans cette situation, dans cette position que j'affirme ici aujourd'hui, que nous devons prendre en considération tous les échelons de la société et avoir des produits spécifiques adaptés. C'est le cas également de notre diaspora que j'ai cité tout à l'heure, qui transfère pratiquement l'équivalent de 25% de notre PIB. Il faut arriver à créer des produits spécifiques adaptés à cette frange de la population pour pouvoir booster l'économie et en créant beaucoup d'emplois pour les jeunes également, au risque de tomber dans ce qu'on appelle la formation des universitaires chômeurs, entre guillemets.
Merci. Dr. Tekang, thank you. Dr. Tekang, you have the final word.
Sure. Thank you very much. You know, the experience we've had so far is that there is too much emphasis on using the excuse of lack of capital as the reason why there's a lot of poverty and lack of employment. If you have those resources, but you do not have good institutions that would administer programs for those resources, you're not going to make much progress. We've certainly had the experience where we have deployed large amount of capital over decades in specific sectors that were expected to create jobs and reduce poverty, but they really wasn't very successful. But in instances where there was a recognition for strong institutions that have the governance in place, that has the competence of management to deploy those resources well in a sustainable manner, we've had better outcomes. So I think in addition to mobilizing capital and having resources, we need to, in the continent, we need to begin to place importance, or more importance, on building very strong institutions with the right governance in place, have the competent teams that will manage these resources. And I believe when we start moving in that direction, we will see better outcomes that are meant to address poverty as well as reduce unemployment. We certainly have some of our portfolio companies that were established in the last decade where those were practiced in terms of ensuring we have the right business model, we have the right governance structure in place, we have the right competent teams that are managing these resources and those programs. We've had better and more improved outcomes from the same quantum of resources. So I think that is something that we need to look at as a continent in terms of better deploying our resources and having the right institutions to do that. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this wonderful discussion on United We Stand, deploying Afro-Caribbean resources for sustainable development, perspective from monetary authorities. Enjoy the conference. Audience, thank you for your attention. Mr. President, good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity, sir. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, can I have... No? Yes? Aha, thank you. I have to beg you this morning. A round of applause to our moderator, Alto Vice, all the way from the Bahamas. Thank you, sir. I know you have a meeting, you gentlemen. I know that there's a Ministers of Finance and Central Bank Governors meeting now outside to the left. I'm sure the ushers will take you there. Thank you very much, sirs. Now we're going to have what I call a mega panel now, a very, very big panel. I think there's nine panelists and the title is Unlocking Capital to Deliver Prosperity for Africans. Whilst they shuffle the furniture around, because they have to move, and the microphones, I've got a few minutes actually, and I've got a microphone right here. And I'm going to come into the audience because I've not really heard from the audience and who the audience are over here. So let's see who we have that we haven't heard from. I can see the former vice president of my own country, the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I know there's a lot of my kinsmen and kinswomen here today. And our former vice president, His Excellency Vice President Sambo, is sitting here quietly as always. You know, if I have a microphone and you're around, you know what happens next. I give it to you. This is if I can give you this, this is not an ordinary annual general meeting. This is celebrating 30 years, as Professor Orama says, 30 years of an organization that when they started out, they had a belief that they were doing something special, that they could make history, they could have an impact. But I'm sure even they had no idea what kind of impact they could have. It's been quite transformational. You've been a big supporter of Afreximbank and done everything you can to support this organization. Just tell me what comes to mind when we look at 30 years of the African Export-Import Bank.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I think it is really highly appreciated that the founding fathers of the Afreximbank did an excellent job, and we are witnesses today on the achievements of Afreximbank. Without Afreximbank, I believe today we'll be telling a different story. The bank has done extremely well. It has created investments. It has created the infrastructure. And today, the greatest infrastructure that has been put in place is this issue of trading between African countries. The only means that we will get released from our economic independence. I will seize the opportunity to congratulate the bank and look forward for greater achievement. Thank you.
Round of applause, please, for our former vice president from Nigeria. I see the president of the bank in. Could I grab you for just a second, because I see that people would love to hear from. We heard your speech earlier, and Mia Motley was here with us yesterday. That was quite a special moment. You're not just talking the talk; you're walking the walk in terms of bringing the diaspora and Africa together. This is a 30th year anniversary for Afreximbank. I was reading an article that you did in African Business Magazine, walking down memory lane, talking about how there were just 6 of you when you started and got to, is that right? And you were staying in, I think, the Intercontinental Hotel. You didn't even have an office. And President Edodu was quite a visionary individual. This was a hard-working man, and in many ways your mentor, I would imagine, as a young banker at that time. As we get to 30 years on, 30 years it almost happens in a flash to some degree. What are your feelings about, looking back down memory lanes? You must have a tremendous sense of pride, and maybe that fuels you for the work that's yet to be done.
Thank you very much, and let me recognize Vice President Sambo and all the dignitaries here. Thank them for joining us as we celebrate 30 years. Celebration for all of us, not just Afreximbank, because Afreximbank is our bank. It's a collective bank of everybody. For me, what 30 years of Afreximbank has taught me is that whenever you put your mind on something, and work hard on it, remain focused on it, you will achieve it, notwithstanding the odds. It will not be easy, but you must have the spirit of the harder they come, the harder they fall. No matter how difficult it is, you must overcome it. And the best way for an African institution in a continent of 55 countries, fragmented by colonialism, divide and rule, is to make sure that you rise above that and have the support of your constituents. That is the greatest backbone you will have. Because everything you do that disrupts the status quo will meet, always meet, the forceful counterattack. It's with that strong backbone that you will always use to excel. And as we look ahead, Afreximbank, we are really happy and pleased that it has become systemic to the continent. Becoming systemic, we have no illusions that it's not going to be easy. The challenge is, when I finish my term and I leave, one of the things I will tell the person taking over from me, that the job will be harder, require greater courage, require greater vision, and above all, it will require greater love for the continent, the Africa first. If we have that, we'll get the support of everybody, we'll be able to look others in the face and tell them, I do this for my people, just as you are doing for your people. Thank you.
And thank you. Professor Benedict Orama said it all there. Now we're going to quickly move on to the next panel. I don't need to say much because I have possibly Africa's greatest moderator there in Bronwyn Nielsen from the Nielsen Network, and also the force behind all that's happening, the madness that has to happen to make what's possible on stage. She is the program director, and she's also the moderator for the next panel. Over to you, Bronwyn Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Mark Edo, Africa's greatest moderator, Mark Edo. Let's give him a round of applause right now. Thank you very much. Right, next up, we have Unlocking Capital for Prosperity, for Africa's prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, we have got an enormous panel. This must be one of the biggest panels of a 20-year broadcast career, and I'm going to call up my panelists in order that they will be seated. I have got Mr. Alain Chibozo, who is the chief economist of the West African Development Bank. Mr. Kayode Pitan, he is the CEO of the Bank of Industry. Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you could be seated right next to me and down. Thank you. Mr. Tarun Sharma, he's the Deputy Managing Director, India Exim Bank. We can give them a round of applause as we get them to their seats. Mr. Christian Yoka, who is the director, the Africa Agence Française de Développement, AFD. Mr. Jeremy Awori, Group CEO, EcoBank Transnational Incorporated. The Honorable Mr. Emmanuel Tutuba, Governor of the Bank of Tanzania. Mr. Dennis Denya, Executive Vice President, the African Export-Import Bank. Mr. Solomon Quaynor, Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization Complex at the African Development Bank. Mr. Mahesh Kotecha, President, Structured Credit International Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, please can you give another welcome to Mahesh, if you can take the seat. We've also got Nikita Gusakov, who is CEO of Exia. Thank you so much, Nikita. Gentlemen, please be seated. Nikita, thank you very much. A round of applause for Nikita Gusakov. right in front of me, I have a 60-minute clock. We have 10 people on the stage. We're going to divide this into 3 sections with regard to unlocking capital for prosperity. The first section we're going to talk about is that there is capital. There is capital, but it needs to be directed appropriately to the productive sector. The second theme that we will cover in this panel is with regards to the reality of risk around Africa. Is it reality, or is it just perspective, and what can we do about it? And the third element, we will look at innovative instruments and guarantees as a solution to unlocking capital. Right, so if we can go to that first theme, and I'm going to kick off with Alain. If you could give me your comments, sir, on the issue at hand. Capital is there, but how do we direct it appropriately to the productive sector? Alain. Sorry, Alain, I think that microphone's not working, sir. I'm just going to make sure technical sorts that out. In the interim, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to go to Coyote. Perhaps you could give us your opening thoughts, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
No.
So,
right, there we go.
So thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So the question about capital, I would say, need to be, I would say, clarified. What is the issue? Capital, and especially the capital that can absorb losses, is key, because when we take some risk, if things go wrong, we need to sit on part of capital which can be used to face these losses without any issues. And of course, this means that it's difficult to find this capital because most of those who have this capital are risk adverse, number one, and two, tend to charge a lot to give this capital. So our challenge is when we have some capital and when we have some loss-absorbing capital, our challenge is to make sure that we use exclusively this loss-absorbing capital on assets which may face losses. Unfortunately, what's happening today, in some projects, we use capital to find assets which actually are not risky. And the most examples is some projects where we use some capital to finance some headquarters, some properties. And that's something we need to work on.
Thank you very much. Coyote, if I can get you to come in from a Bank of Industry perspective, and I think the point that Alain makes there is incredibly important. The fact that we could be directing capital to the wrong projects. Perhaps pick up on that theme, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, like he said, capital is available, but we have to be creative the way we go about looking for capital. You ask yourself, they say, well, we don't have long-term capital in Africa. That's not true. Maybe the long-term capital in Africa, they're in the wrong places. For instance, there's a lot of pension funds in South Africa, a lot of pension money in Nigeria. The African countries have most of their foreign reserves in foreign banks, earning close to nothing. And then they go around to go and borrow money from the commercial banks and pay anywhere between 7 and 12%. So if you know where to look, capital is available. But then most African countries have problem accessing the capital. One, we need to look at the financial structures of those countries. Taxations, for instance. Most African countries, you'll be surprised how much we collect in taxes. The rich don't pay, So a lot of money also is locked up. So that has to be. And then you now ask, what do we even need the capital for? You look at our import pattern. In Africa, we're importing champagne, importing different kinds of things. When we should focus on using those monies to create wealth by exporting things that can create value. So when the foreign
So Coyote, I'm going to get Tarun to come in here. I just want to get one point. You haven't answered my question in terms of whether, sorry, can you give it back to Coyote for a moment, whether we are in fact directing capital to the wrong areas on a regular basis across Africa. If you could answer that and then hand the mic to Tarun, please.
I think we are doing that in a lot of countries. We are not putting the capital where we should get good returns. You know, for instance, we have to be very creative in our thinking. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, there was a time we had a lot of US dollars that was given to Nigerian banks to finance the manufacturing of chocolates. And I told them that my belief was that we are better off putting those monies in Nestle, you know, to buy shares there and export the cocoa until we are ready. Because the chocolate they were talking about, we're not the one eating it.
Exactly. Tarun, pick it up, please, from an India Afreximbank perspective.
Thank you. I think, yes, there is capital available, but in terms of, what we see total investments requirement over the next 5 years, I think there's a gap of about $1.5 to $1.8 trillion. Now, what's really happening is that in Africa, the focus has largely remained on commodities. If you look at where the investment is going, and where Africa's exports are going, they're largely dependent on commodities. Almost half of the exports are related to that, and largely in the petroleum sector. Now, one encouraging trend that I see in recent times is that if you look at over the last maybe decade or so, we're seeing the pickup of FDI investments in greenfield projects. We're seeing it moving into connectivity, into transportation, into green social housing. So we're seeing a gradual shift. Is that enough? Perhaps not. We need to do a lot more to try and get it into the right places where it's not going as yet. Thank you.
Right, before we hand that mic further, what you are seeing right now, ladies and gentlemen, is an advertisement across the stage, which says, welcome to the annual meeting for Afreximbank 2023, because I want to check whether Christian Yoko's mic is working. So, Christian, it's an ad break, and you start talking.
I'm so happy to be here. Apparently it's working.
Right.
So happy birthday to Afreximbank.
Go ahead, Christian, and bring in your point, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, this question of capital availability is a key one. And indeed, the issue is not so much about the availability of this capital, but the channel. Which channels shall we use? And we do think at AFD that one of the best and main channels is to go through development bank, public development bank. There is no country that has been able to strive without having a public financial arm. That's why we do support this club, IDFC club of international development banks that gather 26 banks around the world, 5 of which in Africa. And they have a strong capital and financial capabilities because they represent 600 billion USD per year in terms of financial commitment. And those actors are on the ground. They know where to direct financing. So we do think that that's a proper channel to be used in order to make sure the capital goes on the right sectors.
Jeremy, from an EcoBank transnational perspective, if you can weigh in, and again, gentlemen, you are the experts on the panel, so weigh in with your most pressing thoughts when it comes to the topic at hand.
So thanks, Bronwyn, and good morning to everyone. There are 2 or 3 areas which I think we have to confront when it comes to capital allocation. If we look at agriculture, and you look at lending in commercial banks, and the percentage of banks' balance sheets that go to agriculture, it is probably in single digits in most countries. Yet agriculture employs most people and supports the livelihoods of most people. So there's work that I think we need to do in agriculture. How do we organize it? How do we organize smallholder farmers? How do we risk share so that we can take this at scale? And why is that important? It's important because we need to get self-sufficiency in food for our people, first and foremost. So that's one. Second, I think we have an issue around affordable housing. Do we have sufficient affordable housing for people to live in? How do they get on the ladder? and move their lives forward. And then the third, which is the other big employer, is on the SME front. How do small businesses get capital? And it's a complicated area because there's a lot of information gaps. It's difficult to price risk. There is high delinquency. And I think there's more work we need to do working together around trying to see how do we get better at pricing this. They also lack collateral. So it becomes difficult to collateralize your position. So I think those are three areas that I say we've got more work to do in terms of allocating capital. And EcoBank is focusing on that as we do so.
Governor Tutuba, if you can weigh in from a Tanzanian perspective, again, we're looking at the fact that capital does exist, but we need to direct it to the appropriate productive sectors. Governor.
Thank you very much, Moderator. First of all, I would like to appreciate and extend our appreciation to Afreximbank and the good leadership of our great brother and for celebrating this 30 years of operationalization. Yeah, with regards to Tanzanian experience, well, we have been providing some support to different levels, but with regards to capital, it depends sometimes on the behavior of the recipient. You know, based on my experience, because you have been supporting, first of all, the agriculture sector. We have the Agriculture Development Bank and even other commercial banks where the central bank also provided a monetary policy instrument to lower the interest rates for agriculture. Currently, we are providing at the level of 9%. For those who may develop a bankable project, but as well, we managed to collaborate with the local government authority where they allocate 10% of their own sources to support youth, women, and the people with a disability. So by doing so, what I can just say for 20 activities, because I have seen the issue of behavior in managing that capital, where I have realized to have like 3 different behaviors. There are those who are serious with the investments. When you give them capital, they direct you on what have planned to implement. But there are those whom once they receive a capital, they automatically change their mindset and want to venture other maybe projects. But for us, we have been very strict to enable that even other banks, once they provide the capital to those businesses, they make a closer follow-up to ensure that the projects are also succeed. So,
thank you, Governor. I'm going to get Dennis to come in here, Afreximbank's voice on topic at hand. Dennis.
No,
Go ahead, just hold it close.
Bronwyn. Definitely capital is available, but as institutions, we have to make ourselves attractive to the people who have the capital, whether it's debt capital or equity capital. So how do you do that? As an institution like Afreximbank, you have to have the correct credit ratings. So it's important. We got our first rating in 2009, and over the period, we've improved it. So even during the difficult period of 2022, we were upgraded by 2 rating agencies. That makes us attractive. But you also need to have the products that are targeted. For example, we are promoting AFCTA, and we need to finance African entrepreneurs, not only with the debt capital, but also with equity. So we set up a fund for export development, to provide that equity capital to enable African entrepreneurs to participate in the FCTA. But we've heard that a number of people have good ideas, but they don't have bankability projects. So you need to have a product that will enable African entrepreneurs to move from idea to bankability. So we introduce a project preparatory fund to help in that regard. So as an institution, you need to be fit for purpose and be attractive to providers of the capital that you need, whether it's equity or debt. But you also need to develop products that are targeted at the areas that you want to develop.
And I think that theme of bankability, lack of bankability, Solomon Kweno, is something that you've heard over and over again in terms of getting the products online.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. Given that this is my first opportunity representing the African Development Bank to make some comments here, Professor Orama, congratulations on your 30th birthday. Senior management, Dennis and others. Babaka and I would be very happy in terms of what you've become. So congratulations. On behalf of President Adesina and the senior management of the African Development Bank, I'd like to convey those congratulations. But Bronwyn, let me touch on the capital aspect, because there's an aspect of capital that we haven't discussed. So Jeremy and I yesterday met, and we said, yes, this is, Africa is primarily a banking market. But then that means the capital are short-term deposits. We need long-term local currency and even foreign currency capital. The financial markets the financial assets across the world, 110 trillion. Only a trickle is coming to Africa. So that's part of the reason why we as the AFDB decided we have assets on our books. Let's do a synthetic securitization to attract US investors. And we were supported by Africa 50 and Marina. So partnerships is very important in doing this. But let's bring this closer to home. We have what we call the $2.5 trillion story. If you look at the sovereign wealth funds, if you look at the pension funds, if you look at the insurance pools, assets under management in Africa are really around $2.5 trillion. Now we, in partnership, Dennis, ourselves, others, need to figure out what do these investors want? What risks are they uncomfortable with? And how do we mitigate or de-risk so that we can channel those funds?
Exactly.
into the
Solomon, I want to
industrial
bring
sector.
Mahesh in here, and it is that. Capital flows where capital is welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Capital flows where capital is welcome. And I take from Dr. Orama earlier in terms of saying, Professor Orama, that it is about Africa first. So I think we're all saying the same thing. It's about speed of execution right now. Mahesh, I want to bring you in, and please take into account what the rest of your panelists have said. Add your voice, sir, and then Nikita, I'm coming to you. And then, gentlemen, we're going to jump around the panel, so don't expect me to go in the same order again for the next theme. Mahesh.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here at the invitation of Dr. Orama. I thank you for that, and I also congratulate you on the 30th birthday, as well as on getting an upgrade. It should have been an upgrade to single A. It was an upgrade to triple B. We hope that you get to a single A someday soon. So congratulations. The speakers before have said a lot of different things, and I want to pick up on a couple of threads there to talk about risk. Portfolio investors are typically short-term investors. So they react to short-term market conditions. Long-term investors are really what you want from abroad. Foreign direct investment is really what you want. And for that, you need to have proper bankability of projects, and you need to have proper risk mitigations to cover real risks and perceived risks, both. Real risks are difficult to really change. They take time. Nigeria, for example, where President Obasanjo was here yesterday, I don't know if he's still here, but Tinubu is doing a great job of trying to fix the real issues in Nigeria. Other countries have done many policy reforms. Nigeria is embarked on a major change with the elimination of subsidies and the floating of the exchange rate, and more to come. So those real changes have to make a difference, and they did make a difference in the spreads almost immediately, although that has to be sustained over time. Then there's the issue of perceived risks, and there's a lot of discussion on perceptions of risk. The rating agencies are blamed for much of that, and the investors are blamed for that. And I think that there is a very interesting question that can be raised as to how do you address both real risk and perceived risk. Perceived risk, I thought, should be addressed 20 years ago when I was at the Council on Foreign Relations with the assignment of ratings. So I was involved in the first set of ratings that were funded by the US government and by the UNDP, and 20 years later we have a $300 billion market for African sovereign bonds, which would not have existed without those sovereign ratings. So let's not forget, when we bashed the rating agencies, those ratings made it possible to get those bond issues done. Now,
Mahesh, we're going to drill down into the risk premium in the next round. Nikita.
Thank you very much. First of all,
happy anniversary, and thank you for inviting us here, and thank you for making this event, which is really a central point of every community of bankers, corporates coming here. I may sound not that orthodox as previous speakers, but I think we need to stop thinking in dollar terms. We already settling in multiple currencies. We go into CNY, we go into dirhams, we go into rupees, which means we need to start borrowing in these currencies. And the pockets of liquidity are there. We just need to focus on that, make the right road shows to these markets, and start getting this funding available. That's one point. The second point, the classical model of safekeeping, and I want to echo to what the colleague from African Development Bank said. Africans should learn from Russian experience. We did the same thing. We were keeping our funds at the US European banks at 0%, and we're borrowing at single or double digit. It's no longer available. We need to employ the local capital into the local market without the going into intermediaries and perceived safeness of this money being kept with the international banks or others. If we do that, it means we're not only safe on the costs, but we also deploy the capital where it is generated. And the Africans have a lot of capital inside and outside the countries. So if we do that, it will bring enormous amount of new funding to the local market.
Thank you very much. So we have 34 minutes left, and we're going to distribute that equitably across our panelists. So you have just over 3 minutes each, and instead of following those 3 themes, because I know that we're not going to make 2 sessions across the panel again, I'm going to defer to each panelist where they can take their 3 minutes, they can look at the themes at hand: risk in terms of Africa, perception versus reality, and then I want to include the third theme that I had spoken to you about today, which is innovative instruments and guarantees. So gentlemen, you have 3 minutes each at this stage. I am going to jump around that panel. Mahesh, I'm coming to you right now, sir. In terms of risk premium and looking at the fact that you are going to also innovative instruments, you spoke about them earlier. Your time, sir.
Thank you very much. The issue of risk is pretty critical to investors. They look at the question of whether they get fair return for the risk. And when there is market inefficiency, where a premium is too high, the markets go to arbitrage that away. It is, many banks around the world are out there trading securities that are overpriced and underpriced. So if we feel very strongly that we are paying too much premium, let us create a mechanism to make it possible to drive that premium down, create an index of the premium that people can trade and see in the markets, and then see that they can make more money by going to where the premiums are. And that will attract more money and drive the premiums down. I was involved in creating the first CDO in 1988, 89. That took the junk bond markets in the US, where the premiums were very high, and actually there was not even market access, and made it possible to have access for more people by securitizing the junk bonds into CDOs, collateralized bond obligations and collateralized debt obligations. I know they then hit some market problems in 2008, but they were from the asset-backed securities market, not from the high-yield bond market or the high-yield loan market. So there are mechanisms that could be addressing the market inefficiencies that we think we have in African premiums by creating mechanisms to a market itself cure the premiums by creating an index.
I like that. We are building solutions, creating an emerging market index. Governor Tutuba, you are up next, sir. 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I join hands with my brother, the way he has said, and we have seen in the market. Of course, the issue of premium has been a challenge. Previously we used to get money at a very reasonable terms. And now we are also facing the same challenges. When now premiums goes up, of course, even the margin also is being affected based on the current market circumstances. Now we have seen some of the lenders, they can also accept it to rebrand the financing. And you have seen, especially if you go to ECA, there are some times where if you are not in a higher risk based on the modality or the level that you have been assessed to your country, then you can also get those money in good terms. So based on the premium, of course, sometimes it depends on the structure of the financing arrangement. We used to have, for example, the gender bond, which was subscribed or oversubscribed by some lenders, because the way it was structured, it was targeting to some small and medium entrepreneurship businesses. So people were motivated. So sometimes it depends. We have also witnessed some activity projects, especially if you tied up with environmental sensitive initiatives. You'll find that you can also get some premiums can go low, and at that stage as well, even the margin can also go low. It depends on sometimes the way you structure your financing arrangement. But you have seen to some extent as well, if you are issuing, for example, a bond, which is aligned up with some social services activities, you can also complement to lower the premium. But it depends. For example, for Tanzania, since we have been rated at a B2 plus, then there is a level of margin where, as a country, if your debt sustainability is not at a very risky rate, then you'll get either premiums which will be to some extent affordable according to the level of the market. Thank you very much.
So from the beautiful country of Tanzania in East Africa, we go now to the West African Development Bank. Allah, you come in here.
Thank you, thank you. Let me take an example, because we are facing these issues of risk and risk premium. We finance on part of our assets, we finance roads. And today, financing roads, especially roads that will generate revenues through tolls, usually these projects are not charged with high-risk premium. We can find some capital to finance this with decent risk premium. And that, by the way, is the reason why across our countries you would find a lot of projects with infrastructure, roads, airports, ports, and everything. Because there are some revenues that can be used partly to pay the cost of the capital which is allocated to finance these projects. However, at the same time, we also finance schools or hospitals. And we all know a school will not generate any revenues. And the issue we're facing today, we know that building schools is our future. It's critical, we have to do it. But a project of building school will be charged high capital and high risk premium. So one of the ways to do it for us is to use mutualization. To make it simple, to use part of the future revenues that would be generated in a project on the road, to use part of these revenues to secure the funding and the resources allocated to pay the capital for a school. And we would do that for one reason, because we all know that there is a unity, and the development of a country is only one way to do it, and we have to do everything at the same time. No way we would give the priority to the short-term issues, the road, and it's good to have the roads, because this is the free trade, the free trade area needs the roads, and at the same time, we cannot sacrifice the future. This, in a nutshell, what I should do.
Nikita, we have the BRICS Summit looming in August. I think it kicks off 21st of August in South Africa. I think if we can bring in the Russian perspective right now as we talk about these innovative instruments, we talk about guarantees, we talk about solidarity as emerging markets. You mentioned earlier pulling away from the influence of the US dollar. Perhaps weigh in with that commentary.
Thank you. Yeah, I think BRICS financial instruments are underdeveloped. We obviously have the new development bank, which previously was called BRICS Bank, but we believe it's not deploying enough capital into supporting the projects in the countries that are forming BRICS. So the summit would be one of the opportunities to discuss that. And we believe BRICS countries have a lot of interest in Africa. So not only South Africa, but also the Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that BRICS, through the instruments they have, and maybe even through, settlement currencies, funds, not only the new development bank, may bring a lot of new capital into Africa if it's channeled right. And coming back to the question of risk, just one comment. I think that the African institutes that are here in the continent, like Afreximbank, like African Development Bank, should focus more on the guarantee business rather than funding business, because funding is available. The question is that the international market, whether we're talking about emerging markets or developed markets, they're still, very much skeptical about African risk. But they are ready to fund directly, provided they have credit enhancements. So once we have the institutions focusing more on the credit enhancement, we can get the direct funding, and it will save a lot of costs to African borrowers.
I just want, first of all, Tarun to come in. Mahesh, then you can come in with a comment there. But Tarun, if you could take it from an India perspective, and we can build on, please, the theme that is being put forward there from a BRICS perspective, guarantees. I don't think we've focused enough on the importance of guarantees in this conversation. Tarun.
No, absolutely. On guarantees, I was looking at a report from the India-American Development Bank, which said that although MDBs are funding about 45% of private sector resource mobilization, guarantees account for only about 5%. And that's a very small number. Now, at around the time that COVID hit, we were looking at another study by the Asian Development Bank, which said that the total gap in trade finance is about 1.7 trillion. And we saw Afrexim had started a wonderful program on trade facilitation. IFC has got something great, the African Development Bank as well. But we said, no, as Exim Bank, we are only going to look at medium to long-term financing. And soon we changed. We said, no, we must try and do something here. The program started on a pilot basis last year. We've done over 100 transactions, covered over 300 million of trade transactions with multiple countries in Africa, across the north, south, east, and west. This year, we're looking to have the program go upwards of $1 billion. That shows that the risk perception, what's happening really is that when you look at the risk part of it, the number of the RMAs that were there with banks has reduced dramatically because the perceived risk is very high. Again, to quote a study, Moody's did a study from 1983 to 2019, which showed that the total delinquencies on debt in Africa is amongst the lowest in the world. That shows that perceived risk is perhaps higher than the actual risk involved, whether it's trade finance or it's long-term investments going into markets. Now, when you look at, again, I made a point on the extractive industries. If you look at non-extractive sector, that's where investments are not flowing enough. And we need to look at looking at making certain regulatory changes, looking at developing or building institution frameworks stronger. And IFC has done a study which says that if this goes well over the next 4 years, we could see an additional 20 billion of investments flowing just in sub-Saharan Africa through these small changes. So there's a lot that can be done if we get it right. I think the future is very great. I'll just quote a couple of examples. For instance, Kenya, we've done supported a textile company that has now created jobs. It is exporting out. In Mozambique, we started supplying PV modules for solar, setting up solar generation.
Today, we are seeing that Mozambique, with additional funding, has now started manufacturing their own PV modules in Mozambique. The last point is here in Ghana. We are looking at a multimodal transportation network because it reduces cost, it reduces freight, it increases our move towards green transportation. And that multimodal transport, that corridor, we are funding it from Tema to Akosambo. It goes up to Burkina Faso. That can be a game changer, particularly for landlocked countries, because you manufacture and then you export out at much lower cost than what would
And I
otherwise.
think that is the issue. Is we start looking at these tangible examples of change, then we can celebrate the traction that we are making as Africa. Solomon.
So it's interesting. The gentleman from Russia talked about the fact that DFIs should start to really shift from lending to guarantees. Those of you who were in the prior panel heard the Minister of Finance talk about their issuance into the Panda bond market. The African Development Bank is using its AAA balance sheet to provide a partial credit guarantee to help Egypt diversify its sources of funding. And we're able to do this, helping them get tenor extensions and also, of course, price savings. Okay, so yes, we're going to do that. But we've got to go beyond what we as MDBs can do and create African institutions to do the same. And this is part of the reason that we've partnered with, the Pitch Group, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, the Africa Finance Corporation, to create InfraCredit Nigeria. InfraCredit Nigeria has credit-wrapped infrastructure bonds in that market to the tune of about $500 million to date. Local currency, okay? We're going to create one in East Africa. We're going to create another one in other markets until we really start to mobilize African capital into the productive sectors. So for us, we've never seen a bankable project that cannot find money. So that is the gap that we need to think about. We need to look at ways in which we can scale up project development, speed up project development, especially in green infrastructure. And this is also why we are working with partners. We call it Team Africa, Team Europe combined, and Team America to create the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa to actually speed up, scale up green infrastructure, which is where the gap is in Africa. Thank you.
Jeremy Awori, let's weigh in with a private sector voice here.
There are a few points that come to mind here. They were mentioned by the panelists. The reliance on outside funding to solve Africa's problems is a mindset shift that we need to move away from. We have a lot of local resources. The question is are we deploying those local resources, and what more can we do to actually get those resources and guide them into the right investment? So what I call local direct investment needs to be a focus, and local currency, local direct investment. For people to invest, they need the confidence. We've talked about perception around the risks that are being taken. Governments need to create that confidence by creating marketplaces that people can rely on, rule of law, that people's business investments will be protected, and that they're doing what they need to do at a macro level to give us that confidence that we're not going to find a reduction in value of our investments over time. There's a point that was also made around savings. How do we push up our savings culture? Whether that's pension savings or just individual savings, which comes back down to banking penetration. If we can drive up banking penetration using digitalized services, then we get cheap funds in terms of current accounts or savings accounts that can be used by the banking system to lend into SME, into agriculture, among others. We need to get better information, in my mind, both at a macro level for external investors, but also at a micro level. How do banks and other financial institutions use information to make credit decisions and rely less notionally on security, as I mentioned before? And then also working with various partners, what instruments can we use and develop that will attract capital? So we've got many millions of Africans in the diaspora who are saying, I want to invest in Africa, but where do I put it? So normally they go and they build a house or they invest in their relative's business, but can we pool together investment opportunities where people can come and say, I'll take my dollars and I'll invest there. It's transparent, it's professionally managed, and create an ecosystem of investment opportunities. But that will obviously push us to have to then drive up governance to give that confidence. And that's something at EcoBank we're quite keen on working with various partners, because this is not something where we're competing with each other. We have to work together to build these capital markets, whether it's multilaterals, bilaterals, DFIs, banks, other financial institutions, because we've got great talent, we have got great people, we have got great resources. Let's create the instruments that will give them confidence to invest in our continent and countries. Thank you.
Let's create instruments that will give investors confidence to invest in our continent. Kayore, Bank of Industry.
Sorry, get it.
Thank you very much. Talking of risk perception in Africa, it's very real. For instance, you pick the case of Nigeria. The rating agencies we've spoken about, they quickly downgraded Nigeria from B2 to B2 minus to CAA, and what that means is that the cost of raising money for Nigeria has just gone through the roof. Now, if you were to ask the rating agencies, why do you think, the rating for Nigeria is the right rating? They will tell you very quickly that the debt profile is very high, that Nigeria spends a lot of money on subsidy. There are multiple exchange rates in Nigeria. Okay, no problem. We have a president who has come in. He has removed subsidy. He has aligned the multiple exchange rates. So we asked them, so why have you not upgraded Nigeria? Say we are watching it, And the same thing happens in a lot of places, that the cost of raising money in Africa is very high. But like some of my colleagues here have said, you need to be creative and use guarantees and find means by which you can reduce your cost of raising money. Last year, in spite of the rating of Nigeria, Bank of Industry was in the market 2 times last year. February last year, we went to the bond market. We raised 750 million euros. It was very successful before the market went further north. In August of last year, we were also in the market, and we raised 1 billion euros. Now, the point is, if Bank of Industry went to the market to raise money, if Nigeria had been downgraded to CAA, and we are a sub-sovereign, it means we are going to raise money at the rate Nigeria will raise the money plus X, because the sovereign is supposed to be, a better borrower. But we couldn't raise money at those rates, as a DFI. So what we did was to make use of some of the instruments that we had discussed here. We went to the market, spoke to AFDB, spoke to AFC. Now, AFDB has a triple A rating. AFC has an A3 rating. So we were able to get a wraparound, with AFC, and that reduced our cost of raising money substantially. So it was successful, and the rate was actually much lower than even Nigeria itself could have raised money. So the thing is that the guarantees are available. If you know what to do, if you are creative, the funding is available for Africa. But then you need to package it well. You need to have good projects. Like Solomon said, there are very few well-packaged African projects.
And I think that's a brilliant point to take it through to Dennis. There are very few well-packaged African assets. Do you agree, Dennis, from an Afreximbank perspective?
Yes, I do agree. There are very few projects that are packaged, but working together collaboratively, we can actually make that happen. And we are starting to see that. We've worked with the AFC on the Bank of Industry transactions. We have worked with the FDB on a number of transactions. So working together, we can make this thing happen. The risk perception is there. To give you an example, on a standalone basis, Afreximbank is rated A by Fitch. It's public knowledge. But because we operate in Africa, they notch us 3 levels down because of the perception of their risk on the continent. And my view is, where does that perception come from? It comes from lack of knowledge. They don't understand the constituent countries on the continent. You remember when Ebola broke out in West Africa, they were issuing advisories in Cape Town. It's just, they don't know. Our engagement with the rating agency resulted in them reducing those 3 notches to 2, because we're now educating them about the reality on the continent. In terms of packaging, we actually have now established a separate department called Guarantees and Specialized Funding to really focus on this issue of guarantees. We provide our clients with guarantees to enable them to win contracts in support of African contractors. Because if you look historically, most of the major contracts were given to foreigners because even our own governments did not trust the capacity of the local entrepreneurs. So we're stepping in, providing those guarantees to enable them to win those contracts and finance them to import the equipment to execute those contracts. The dam in Tanzania was executed by Egyptian contractors because we provided the insurance that they required, and it's working well. So we are supporting that across Africa. I spoke earlier on about the Project Preparatory Fund. Even the insurance arrangement, the day before yesterday, we launched Afrexsure to ensure that we de-risk these projects and make them bankable.
Christian, I remind everybody of the topic at hand. We're looking at innovative instruments. We're looking at guarantees. We're also packaging that with Africa and the risk premium, whether it is perception or reality. Christian.
Yes, Bradley. As you know, there was a conference this week in Paris on this new path on financing development, and this very issue of guarantees and how to bring the private sector in will be addressed during that discussion. The issue has to be addressed in line with the way we can bring the private sector to indeed finance sectors that are in line with the agenda of transforming economies in Africa. And for that, one of the things that the private sector is asking is for de-risking tools. So we need to find and to work more on this window of providing guarantees. At AFD, we try to do this in 3 ways. First, by supporting directly some African institutions. For instance, we have invested heavily with our friend from African Development Bank in Africa Guarantee Fund, for instance. That is a key player in this very sector. The second thing is what Salomon mentioned, to try to work on the platform of actors in Team Europe, going to look for the grant that Europe has in order to allow us, with our loans, to be able to de-risk some operation. And the last venue that we are using within AFD is to work on public payment guarantees for governments in order to allow the financing of key infrastructure that are done under private-public approach.
Thank you. Right. So, gentlemen, you have all done incredibly well. We have another 7 minutes, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds each to give me your key takeaway from this discussion, Unlocking Capital for Prosperity. Mahesh, I know you wanted to come in earlier, so I'm going to start with you. In terms of your final takeaway, you have 30 seconds each.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to say that the initiatives on guarantees are the most important issue. They need to be scaled up. I worked for a guarantee company for a decade in the US, Monoline. Monoline's guaranteed $3 trillion of debt before they hit the skids in 2008. And they had guaranteed $130 billion in the emerging markets, more than all the multilateral development banks combined at that time. We need to scale up the guarantees that you do multiple times. Every development bank has to do that, and they're to be simpler, and they're to be Africa-wide. Country-by-country guarantee companies are fine, but you need diversification to scale up. That's
Solomon,
what we need.
Build on, scale up.
Capital is available, but we need to actually create the de-risking and the credit enhancement platforms. And I say platforms because we need to aggregate our resources as partners to be able to have a meaningful impact in terms of the project space in Africa. So capital is available, but it's not going to come easy. Let's figure out what we need to do in terms of guarantees and innovation to crowd that capital in. And let's also pay attention to our own African markets and our African sources, because that's captive to us. And if we get that right, the global flows will come on top.
Dennis. Just try it again, sir.
In 2014, we launched the Central Bank Deposit Program, where we're trying to get capital from the continent. We only raised 75 million. In 2022, we raised 8.6 billion from the African central banks and insurance companies and pension funds. So cumulatively, we've raised 33 billion US dollars over this period. So capital is available on the continent. But we've gone further. We are now looking at local currency funding, using our rating to access that capital and provide the tenors that are required for development. So working together with financial institutions such as the FDB, TDB, and even commercial banks like Standard Chartered, Standard Bank, EcoBank. Yes, we absolutely can marshal the capital that is required for Africa's development.
Allah, I'm going to jump to you. Governor, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to take Allah first. Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me to give one more example about innovative instruments. 2.5 years ago, West African Development Bank has issued one of the first ESG bonds. The good thing is, instead of paying 5% plus on the senior debt, we issued on this ESG bond, we paid 2.75%. So a huge economy, which of course will benefit to our populations. The way to do it was to commit that we would use the proceeds exclusively to SDG-related projects. Of course, what is sad is that the non-SDG-related projects were typically excluded from these resources. Fine. But on the other hand, with this ESG bond, we have been able to secure the financing of key projects for our future. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Governor.
Thank you very much. I believe that all projects which can be implemented in Africa actually can have access to capital. What is needed is just to brand them in an appropriate way that will attract the capital. And as we have seen, there are a number of initiatives. If you brand it in a line which can be aligned with climate, it means you can access some discount from various windows which are provided, like ECF, GF, Adaptation Fund, and the like. As well, if you put it, if it can be developed in sensitive to gender, as well as we did in Tanzania, we had a gender bond. So there are a number of ways. What is needed is to just be structured in an appropriate way, and you find a way that can attract financiers to lend on that project. But I believe all the projects can access capital from various ways. Thank you very much.
Coyote, 30 seconds each. We are counting down to that clock. We have exactly 2 minutes left. Coyote.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would say we need to create African champions. You know, we are telling Afrexim 30 years and we are congratulating them. Can you imagine if we can double the size of Afrexim in about 2 or 3 years? and we can do it. We have the capital. You know, we should support people like banks like Afrexim, AFC, and the regional banks. You know, some of the monies we have overseas, let's bring them back home and double and triple the capacity of these banks. They will do more for Africa than the banks we are running after.
Christian.
Yes, in 2 words, I would say that this conversation could not have been more timely. When you look at the context we are in, where needs for financing development in Africa are very, very high, and at the same time, capital flow towards Africa is shrinking. If you look at ODA, for instance, it used to represent 4% of the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa back in 2006. Today, it's only 2.5%. So yes, there's a need to really think how to find resources internally to finance development. And I think that is really key. And I will just finish with one example of something we did here in Ghana, where we financed the Ghana Investment Infrastructure Fund settled by the government of Ghana. It's a sovereign fund, and it allows to finance infrastructure. So we plead for more.
Right, we're going to be 30 seconds over. Jeremy Owori, I want you up next, and then Tarun, you come in. Jeremy.
So for me, it's about partnerships, like what has been said. When I sit with my EcoBank team, I think what's the purpose of being in 35 countries, having 35 million customers? We need to use this in a way that solves African problems and uplifts our continent. So partnering with the players on the stage, the players out there, is going to be key. How do we address some of these problems like trade? We've talked about Africa Continental Free Trade, partnerships like PAPS we heard yesterday. We have a platform today in EcoBank that you can do real-time payments across the continent. Why aren't we using that to encourage small traders to be able to do this? I would also say, let's try new things. We shouldn't be afraid to fail. Let's try some new pilots. If they don't work, what do we learn? If we try new things, then how do we scale up? And I offer EcoBank and our infrastructure to scale. And by working together, I think we can make our own small difference.
And Tarun, the last 30 seconds to you, sir.
I couldn't agree more with Jeremy. De-risking requires us to look at building institutional capacity of banks and institutions across Africa. And I think the onus is upon all of us sitting here on stage. And the second is to look at how do we look at credit enhancing so that banks across Africa develop stronger relationships across banks in other geographies. And lastly, in terms of skilling, I think our focus should be on skilling as we go into productive sectors to not only create employment, but also employability. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, that's us. Thank you very much. A huge round of applause for our panelists. And I just want to say that must be a record. We are at 61 minutes and 15 seconds for 10 delegates on stage. Of course, Nikita's no longer on stage with us. Congratulations, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Mark.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. If I could ask you to exit this way, down these stairs. Thank you for that panel. Now,
EcoBank.
Now, before we break for a coffee break, don't stand up when I say coffee break. We're going to have a few deal signings. As you know, and anyone that has been involved or been part of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair or an Afreximbank annual general meeting, yes, there's talk, there's ideas, but there's also action. And you witness action in many of the deals that are signed during these events. This is no exception. We've got 5 deals today to share with you, for you to be our witnesses to these deals. I know they need to move some of the furniture around because, as you know, when you have these sorts of deals, you need a table, you need the chairs, and you need some lawyers. And I think there are some lawyers around who will appear any minute now. So we're going to have 5. We're going to do 5 deals. I'm just going to wait. We need the witnesses to said deals, the parties to said deals, for said deals to appear. Here comes the table and the chairs. So what I require now for this deal, the first deal that I'm announcing this morning, I need Kanayo Awani of Afreximbank. Kanayo, are you in the house, please? Because you are representing Afreximbank. Kanayo Awani. Is Kanayo Awani here? Madame Awani, have you seen her? Is she here? Dennis Denya. Dennis, you may have to do the honors here because I don't think, so you may have to do the honors and represent Afreximbank. Dennis, our executive VP, will represent for this first one. And then I would like to call Sabelo Sivuyile Makungo, who is the Managing Director of DigiLoop. Can I see Makungo, Mr. Makungo? Yeah, okay, here she is. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Kanayo Awani. Excellent. So all I need is the Managing Director of DigiLoop. The Managing Director of DigiLoop is here as well. Round of applause. This is the first deal of the day. And it is an MOU between DigiLoop and Afreximbank. Before I tell you what the deal is, let me tell you a little bit about DigiLoop. It's a company registered in Mauritius that's focused on enhancement and monitoring of external and internally generated revenues for sovereign states, for countries. The company will operate by collating and analyzing big data from crucial economic sectors, including telecoms and financial services, with the aim of presenting actionable insights. Knowledge is power, right? Information that regulators can use to be effective decision makers and form their policies. So that's what DigiLoop does. It loops digital information. The purpose of this MOU is to provide a broad framework for the collaboration between Afreximbank and DigiLoop towards providing revenue origination, enhancement, and monitoring services, as well as bankability review. Whereas Afreximbank is represented by Mrs. Kanayo Awani, DigiLoop by Sabelo Makungo, and the signing has taken place. Congratulations to both parties on this MOU between DigiLoop and Afreximbank. Now, Madame Kanayo Awani, you are needed for another signing here. Our Vice President of the Intra-Africa Trade Bank. Mrs. Awani will be joined by Floyd Haynes, who's the Chairman of New Haven Merchant Bank. So, Mr. Floyd Haynes, do we have you in the room? Mr. Floyd Haynes, the chairman, of New Haven Merchant Bank. If you could make yourself known for the signing of the MOU between New Haven Merchant Bank and Afreximbank. If you're here, raise your hand so I can see you. Is he here? So here we have an MOU between New Haven Merchant Bank and Afreximbank. It's a partnership that will work with the Guyanese private sector and the government to identify business opportunities and projects that will be profitable for investors and contribute to Guyanese growth and development. The investments will focus on economically sound businesses and projects that will create manufacturing, agricultural, technology transfer, and service of jobs for the people of Guyana. Now, until recently, Guyana's economic activity was based on extractive commodities that were exported for processing. Afreximbank in New Haven will help change